Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
And thank you very much, Oka, for that lovely introduction. When I gave a keynote speech here in 2022 for the staff, for the teachers, I decided to present the work of people that I'm lucky enough to work with at South Bank Centre, where I was director of music for a long time, and I'm now an associate, an artistic associate. And those are artists who, of course, have unimpeachable standards, what we might call in that contentious word, perhaps, excellence. We talked about this last night. We'll talk about that in a bit, I'm sure. And also have given so much energy and passion to making things better. So I talked about people in my world in London and beyond in the UK, such as Gary Crosby, who's a fantastic Jamaican-born double bass player, jazz musician who was a sort of star from the 1980s onwards in the London jazz scene, but has devoted the last 30 years of his life to the programme Tomorrow's Warriors, which brings on young people and gives opportunities in jazz, particularly to Black and ethnically diverse young people, and also to girls, which is a big issue in jazz. I was talking also about Chichi Nwanoku, who founded Chineke Orchestra at South Bank Centre, and that's the Europe's first majority Black professional orchestra. To Nicola Benedetti, who's the great violinist, who's now, of course, artistic director of the Edinburgh International Festival, but also has a foundation for young musicians. And to James Macmillan, perhaps the UK's leading composer at the moment, who's gone back to live near the town where he grew up, and set up a festival and an education programme in that ex-mining community. So as Oka said, as part of the residency, we've decided to put together this series of interviews of people who are making change in the world of music. And Davone, yes, just to repeat what Oka said, it is just a thrill. You're here. You're in Amsterdam because you're performing tomorrow night at the String Quartet Biennial. And you're described, as Oka said, change is a word that is associated with you, that wonderful New Yorker quote, and so many others which talk about the change that you're committed to. And I suppose you're also defined as a curator, a creator, and a performer. And I just wonder, in that, being all of those things, did you decide consciously that you're gonna, I'm gonna be all of those things. I'm gonna make my own space in this world because you didn't see the space you wanted to go into, or was it just natural? Did it just happen? How did that approach to being an artist happen for you?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure being here, and it's very nice to see all of you. And thank you for the invitation, and thank you for this forum to share something. Was it a decisive decision or something else? I'd say it was almost completely random, in that most paths should be allowed to be circuitous, should be allowed to go in different places and double over. And without telling you my entire life story, or at least maybe skipping that part, falling into, I guess, being called a performer and change maker and so on, the impetus has only been to try to exhibit integrity, to try to be as honest as possible in all the context in which I exist. And my identity happens to be, the cross intersection or conglomeration of a lot of different aspects, as anybody's is, right? My sex, my gender identity, my sexual identity, my race, my inordinate amount of melanin, all of these things intersect in order to create a person. And if you're trying to honor all of those intersections in the context in which you operate, you might be accused of making change simply by existing in your full self.
Yeah.
And so it was never, a forthright goal to change any of those contexts, but rather to find a way to be a full and real person. I think that came from a family that was very encouraging of exploration, very encouraging of, finding the different parts of your identity or giving space to do that. And so naturally, when I fell into contexts where I didn't feel that there was the space to simply be myself, someone with a bit of ingenuity, if not ambition, tries to live, to breathe. If there's not enough space, you try to at least exist, not to break the building down even, but just to simply exist in it. I think a first example might be my conservatory experience. So I went to Harvard for undergrad, and I read sociology. Started with music, but the department there was all history, theory, and pedagogy at the time, which was absolutely wonderful, but I did have a penchant for performing. I played violin as a youngster and piano, and then slowly discovered I had a singing voice that people cared to listen to. But in studying sociology, I wanted to understand why culture created and propagated art. Why people decided to come together and make the institutions of art something necessary and worth supporting. And then I worked in arts administration for some time. I could talk about that in a moment. But for about 3 years before deciding to go to conservatory and just giving myself the chance to be a performer. So I went to Juilliard for conservatory and quickly found that it was very, very different than a schooling experience that I expected. So Harvard is a liberal arts institution. A lot of colleges, or at least colleges in the United States, are, meaning you read a vast number of subjects and you can kind of make your course of study until you find what you kind of, want to be with the most. And there's a lot of agency in that, meaning you can choose your path. You can say, this is what I'd like to explore. There's a due process for finding that path. There's, very old guidelines even of saying, can I interrogate a professor's syllabus? Can I, react to the material being put forth and have some sort of actual engagement in that? So that was kind of the tradition that I was, brought up in educationally, at least in higher education. And then going to Juilliard, I really did want to gain skills. I knew I had a voice and I wanted to train it, and I wanted to understand what it was to, find a classical technique and comportment and all. But I found also very quickly that I didn't exist in a standard way. My voice type is kind of different. I'm categorized as a bass baritone. If you think about older models, a basso cantante, meaning my voice sits pretty low but has a pretty high extension, which is not the meat and potatoes of what Juilliard is trying to produce. The popular, or changing now, even in the past 2 decades, but the popular kind of nexus of opera in the past 20th century has been Romanticism, and also, classical leading up to that, and then some contemporary things on the other side, but this huge bell of Romanticism in the middle. And my voice wasn't naturally attuned to that sort of repertoire, and so I felt a bit left out. There wasn't a clear picture of, being trained to sing a certain way and then to walk across the street and sing at the Metropolitan Opera. So I had to figure out, where I could actually be supported. And that led me on an interesting journey that's been very foundational for what I'm up to now.
So where did you feel you could be supported, if not at the Juilliard? I mean, where was your space that you found straight away?
In corners of Juilliard, in unexpected parts. So early music, I sang a lot of early music in undergraduate. I sang with the Renaissance Polyphony Choir, the Harvard choirs there. and then in chamber ensembles. And it was just more fun, I mean, really wonderful, rigorous training, actually. Our choral director made us tune to the overtones and, focus a lot on vowel matching. But, that sort of skill set. But really, it was for the love of it. No one was getting credit. You spent hours and hours outside of class to do that sort of practice. So early music seemed a place to go, and the director of our program kind of said, well, we don't know what to do with you, so go sing Baroque arias, because voice types were less standard then, in the time of Rameau and Monteverdi, all of these models weren't so classified. So things were written for individuals and individuals that had unique qualities and abilities. So singing Rameau was kind of an awakening and saying, oh, I can do these crazy things, or like weird parts of Handel that were written for, unique voices. But then also contemporary music. I started hanging out with composers. I naturally felt it was really interesting to be in dialogue with the people making the new repertoire. So getting to know new composers and knowing, and the main draw being that the music always had a clear raison d'etre. You always knew why it was happening. Everyone had to be on the same page about that. You're in a situation with a living composer. They're, having to express why this idea is coming together so that all the people involved can gather around that, or even impart their own contribution. So I really appreciated that sort of openness and clarity of purpose that I didn't find in the more standardly classical or romantic repertoire. And similarly, on the other side of things, in Baroque repertoire, or earlier than Baroque even, I was really fascinated by the fact that there is a common practice of listening. There's a common practice of true collaboration. I went for my first Rameau rehearsal with Robert Mealy, who's a wonderful band leader, and I walked into the rehearsal and we all sat in a circle, and all of the instruments and the continuo and everyone together, but in a circle for the first read through of the music. And then the second violinist asked me, we have a phrase together. Do you want to decide the shape of it? And I was like, what? And just looking at the conductor saying am I allowed to speak? And then I was like, well, yes, I do have ideas and I would like to, continue collaborating that way. So in both of those musics, there's either a necessity or a tradition of collaboration, meaning that the individuals are welcomed to express themselves. People are welcomed beyond there being cogs or parts of a machine to realize a Gesamtkunstwerk or what have you. So I found that that's where I gravitated. First, because my voice seemed to fit in those places. But then second, because I found the larger practice and ether of those places much more appealing. So in making change in a way, or how does that move into finding space in various contexts, I then started to realize that I was only good at performing music that I connected to, things that I understood, what is my own life story and how do I feed that into an interpretation? I guess there's more formal ways of getting at that with Stanislavski and acting or all sorts of practices, but it became very natural for me to stand in front of an audience and really try not to lie. Really not try to do make-believe. Yes, but you know what I'm saying? Really to investigate what is this material and how am I going through it and with it.
And there's a reason for why you're performing
it
at that moment to those people. And
completely.
And it's not denying that there are people either on the stage or in the rehearsal room, which you've just described. It's not pretending they're not actual people there or actually in the audience.
And further to this idea of honesty, if I'm honestly standing on a stage and honestly looking at the audience, I see a group of people. There are a group of individuals. There's not some wall that you're singing toward or singing at. You actually have to communicate with people that are present. And it seems kind of wild to me to act like that's not true.
Yeah.
If we were to just have this interview this way, and that would be just disrespectful even. So, but we talked a little bit about early beginnings, and I think this penchant to want to be honest and have the clear reason of music came from my first experience of music in church. Yeah. Growing up in rural Northern Virginia in the Black Baptist Church, all music was for a reason. Everything in a service had a purpose, whether it was for a prayer or for mourning, even in a funeral, for joy or for praise. Music was not decorative. The text applied to real human situations. So it just became my mode to think, why am I singing this song? What's the use of it? And if it's something, like a leader or an art song, to treat it with the same reverence. So thinking, why is this happening? Why do I care to stand in front of people and share?
Yes, I think in Western classical music, there is this particular thing which is, of course, a wonderful thing, this extreme refined abstraction. So you're sitting in a concert hall and you're hearing minuets, but you can't dance, and you're hearing masses, but there's no incense or no prayers. And, it's extremely abstracted. So I guess that's an interesting question about getting back to the reason why music exists and the social context of it. Just before we leave your higher education, because we are in a conservatoire, I just wonder what you think could be better now. What would make it better, since we're in the Conservatorium van Amsterdam and we've got these wonderful open people here who want to, as Oka just said, the director, are open to change. What would you say would be the best thing that an institution like this can do to make a better experience for learning about music?
Yeah, I think the best thing an institution can do is the best thing that an individual can do, which is try to be present and engaging with the people with which you're interacting, meaning asking, who are you? How are you, even more importantly, and then working in reference of that. I've worked quite a lot with the opera director, Peter Sellers. I made my European debut at Stopra with Peter, and in a wonderful piece by the late Kais Ariaho. And he, in the middle of being a young singer and very nervous about what we were doing, Peter said, this is all just a setting. It's all just a space for you to be yourself. Yes, you're playing a character, but you as an individual, your personal, fears, excitements, and what have you, that is what's actually going to fuel the music and thus fuel the interpretation. So how that can translate maybe to a conservatory setting is making a larger practice of getting to know everyone personally. Who are you? Where are you from? What are the traditions you come from? What are your proclivities? And some people might think that that's superfluous or a waste of time or, touchy-feely or something. But if you're in a room, with a quartet or with a group of people, or even as an educator trying to have an exchange, if you don't have that material personal connection, I don't think you can get very far. Mm-hmm. And the things that you might achieve will be, as you say, exquisitely abstract, mm-hmm. and just removed from any sort of humanity. So getting to know individuals for who they are first, I think can imply a lot of change. And also just actively asking, how are you? Because you have to deal with that. No one should be in a rehearsal process or what have you, crying through internally, the biggest problem they've ever had, or any minute thing, or any stress or anxiety. Therapists tell you feel something, name it. Then you can deal with it, or you can put it aside even, but actually engage it. And the bigger part of that is, if you do that, you can really feed that into the music that you're making, How are you really to understand the late Beethoven quartets if you don't understand what it means to to feel despondent or to feel weary. You know, these are real material things, and a lot of times classical music can be divorced from its larger humanitarian or human context. And I just really implore that is not a secondary thing, that is not an additive, but rather the reason. Music is just the potential of catharsis. Yeah.
Well, we might, hopefully we'll come on to some more specific ways that you've dealt with that in your work. I just want to touch on something that you mentioned a few moments ago about your early stages, which interested me. And we had a brief conversation about this when we spoke last night. The idea that you had 3 years working in administration and management. And that seems to me really interesting for how it makes you, well, it's a question really, does it make you somehow more aware, more rounded as an artist to sort of understand everything that's around standing on a stage?
Completely. Yeah, as we discussed, I had a very circuitous route, and you know, studying sociology, I thought it would lead to arts administration. You know, if I could understand why population supported art, maybe I could understand how to help that or how to administrate it. So I was the president of the Harvard Radcliffe Orchestra as an undergraduate, but that's a pretty big job. You know, it's a 200-year-old organization and an orchestra of about 90. So there's a lot to handle there in very real world ways. But that led into being an associate producer at the American Repertory Theater. So helping, you know, support the installation of art at different scales. I then worked at a university, George Mason University in Washington, near Washington, D.C., production manager for their opera company. Really, I went to study with the head of the voice faculty, and they needed a stage manager. And so I had that experience. And so I did that for a few productions, and they liked how things were organized. So they asked me to be a production manager, which was a huge experience as, you know, a 24-year-old, just kind of overseeing a season of a university opera program. Then that led to doing music programming for a national educational nonprofit. So helping them find the students that, you know, wanted to come on music scholarship from all around the country. And then also singing at the National Shrine in Washington, D.C. That was my church job. And it was a really great church job. I mean, it's the seat of the Catholic Church in the United States, and it's all of the pomp and incense that you could ever imagine. But that was also just a fascinating exposure to just a different way of music making for a reason. Yeah. There, you know, the mass ordinary and the entire schedule, there's no point at which music is superfluous. So doing all of those things, I thought I would go into maybe a career as an administrator and go to business school. And then looking into that, it just seemed dreadfully boring. So I realized I needed to try something else, and I really wanted to give myself a chance at singing, and then applied to Juilliard and got in. But what I realized very quickly is that I accidentally had all of this various experience. Oh, yeah, and you mentioned working in artist management, just as an assistant for about a year at IMG Artist Management. So processing contracts. I processed over 70 contracts and got different artists their visas and such. And this was all while trying to figure out what I actually wanted to do. But it was kind of like I had a secret master's degree in a broad array of administration. And then I realized that when I walked into the middle of the machine, you know, as a singer, as a soloist, I couldn't, of course, forget all of the contextualizing experiences I had had. So, you know, understanding, you know, how a lighting rig or grid works, understanding how a budget is put together, understanding how where the money comes from, how it isn't contracted to go out. You know, these are things that you just kind of absorb and what have you. And so accidentally or by chance, I just knew how the machine worked by having tinkered with different parts of it, which has allowed me a lot of facility in creating things. You know, ever since high school, I've loved this idea of creative pragmatism, meaning it's really lovely to dream of going to the moon, and it's really exciting if you know how to build the bridge to get there. That's the more exciting thing.
I remember what you said reminded me of, I was privileged to work with the great 20th century composer Luciano Berio. And I remember doing an interview like this with him right towards the end of his life. And he said something like, I never say I'm a composer, I'm a musician, and it's a very broad landscape to inhabit. And that day, he was, we were at the Santa Cecilia Concert Hall, of which he was artistic director at the time, despite being very ill. And, we had a planning meeting for a festival that was going to be happening in London. He was completely in charge. And then he went straight into a meeting with the unions for the, which is no joke in Italy, of course, with the running the concert hall. And that idea of being a musician in the broadest landscape, so many of the most interesting artists that I've worked with do have that broad understanding of how it all works. But just coming now onto your performance, your concert tomorrow, in which you have, I suppose, created something from scratch. It's much more, it's beyond, I guess, a recital of music that you happen to want to play, to sing, with the Calder Quartet, the wonderful quartet who are with you tomorrow night. It's, I guess, a kind of, you call it mass. It's a ritual, it's an experience, it's got a whole range of different music from Bach to Caroline Shaw to Tyshawn Sorey to Moses Hogan, who I think is a church composer. Tell us something about what that's going to be like, and then what drove you to create this work, which has a lot in common with some of the other projects that you've been doing.
Well, starting with how it was made, it's a program I started thinking about maybe 5 years ago. And I was invited by Carnegie Hall to give a debut recital, which is, a marker for a singer to say it's kind of your first personal artistic statement. And at that point, I'd been really, really involved in contemporary music, not the standard parts of singing, although I do approach that repertoire in a very specific way. My best friend, who's an opera director, we were hanging out by a pool in the mountains in Vermont. He has a house in Vermont. It's a very beautiful mountainous place. And I was saying, I have this recital to plan for Carnegie Hall. And he said, why would you ever do that? I said, well, I don't know. It's an invitation to make a personal statement. And with the idea of trying to be fully myself and honest and having integrity, I'm going to try to present something that, lives within those values. And so we put a lot of songs on a board, about 80 or so, and everything from, German lieder to French chanson to American art song to contemporary snippets of all kinds of things. And it turned into many different drafts. We took out a few songs, and it kind of is a Christmas show that we'll eventually do. But things that, there's a lot of Christmas music that showed up for some reason.
Can't wait.
But the music that I realized, if I'm making a first artistic statement and trying to be honest about who I was, I wanted to signify where I came from musically. And so I realized all of the earlier music in my younger days was liturgical, in the Black Baptist Church, but also in Renaissance polyphony in college, singing different kinds of liturgical music and then singing at the National Shrine or the Greek Orthodox Cathedral. All of that music came from places that I felt had clear reason. So I knew that would be kind of the firmament of, what the repertoire would be. And then trying to determine an organizing principle. People latch on to stories. That is the clearest thing we can do to share something, is tell a narrative. And I was just fascinated with how all of this music could hang together. And the fascination with the Catholic Mass began by singing, in this church context. I had never been to a mass before other than being paid to be there. But I spent, every Sunday for the better part of a year and a half. And my home church was, an hour and a half away out in the country, but I was in DC every Sunday. And the Black Baptist Church is a very communal place. It's even more than a religious experience. It's a community center, a community experience. So I kept having to rationalize why I was sitting here doing this job as opposed to seeing my family on the weekends, the only time I would get to see them. So I had to start thinking about the individual parts of what we were doing and try to come to understand the reasoning behind it. So what really is a Kyrie? It's Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, but it's really just someone asking for help, saying, I have a problem, I need some help. And then an Agnus Dei is maybe acknowledging something that has to change. Yes, the sacrifice of crucifixion, but more metaphorically put, a thing that needs to change. A credo being, I believe that change can happen. Gloria being thankful for that change. And Sanctus saying, this possibility is very special. That there can even be a process is a very special thing. So defining that structure, I realized, it was a good story. I need a problem. I think something can happen. Here's what I have to change. Thank God it changed. And so I chose musics from different parts of this earlier life experience, whether that be gospel or Bach or Handel or various types of chant, and put them into the sections to say, a Kyrie, there's a Handel aria from the Oratorio Simile, which is called Leave Me Loathsome Light. It's saying somebody, feels that they need to get rid of something. And then an Agnus Dei, singing the song by Taishan Sori, which is a setting of a Negro spiritual called Were You There When They Crucified My Lord? Were you there when that thing had to change? Without going into it too much more, I realized that I really loved structures, and especially structures that have been upheld by culture for centuries. The mass structure has existed for a long time. So I think you can trust it. You can dump out all the contents and it still speaks true. It still tells a clear story. So I thought if I structured my things this way, then an audience could have a very clear journey through the repertoire. And there was a reason, and there was a reason for all of the pieces along the way. So I asked Carolyn Shaw, really wonderful living composer, to compose a mass, a tiny mass. We got to know each other over some time. And I said, I need you to write a mass. That's a crazy thing to ask a composer to do. But I said, no, miniature. Like every movement is only a minute long. It's completely a cappella. So that was the challenge. And she did really, really brilliant things like taking the credo, which is the longest mass text, and just distilling it to one word.
Wow.
Just credo, but very stretched out. And so that kind of became the markers of the different sections, and then, the different musics filling in the sections. So that's what I presented as my first recital program. And I think it communicated very clearly and well. And I've done that program quite a lot around the world. But then with what we're going to see tomorrow, if you come or if you see another, I'm also performing it in Rotterdam next week in a different kind of version. But I wanted to expand the language of it. I played violin growing up for about 15 years and always have loved string sounds and orchestral sounds in the quartet. So I thought, well, we can translate the piano music into string quartet music, and we can really find the more ritualistic aspect of it. So I asked a really wonderful colleague, a Dutch director named Lisanke Hesboer, who I met with Dutch National Opera, to help make the ritual that's implicit in the story itself just physicalized, in front of people, so that there's kind of a rite of service as there would be in a mass. But yeah, that's how that got
And it
born.
is physicalized because you're sitting in a circle, aren't you? Going back to your original early music rehearsal, you're sitting in a circle on a specially built, I suppose it's a bench.
It's a bench.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a circular bench, which she showed me a photograph and is extremely beautiful. But this approach that you took to your first Carnegie Hall recital, and that we'll see the version of tomorrow night, you've adopted also when you're being asked to work with orchestras. I'm intrigued by this idea. I think you've created 2 what you call concertos. Is that's what you call them, isn't it? Concertos, which is like a sequence of music for voice and orchestra. Just say something about that concept.
Yeah. They're devised concerti for voice and orchestra. You know, playing violin, I knew I would never solo in front of a great orchestra, but I thought I could sing in front of one. And so the first one got born at the top of the pandemic.
Yeah.
You know, organizations were trying out all sorts of things, and older organizations having to have new ideas. And I was invited by the Philadelphia Orchestra, by Yannick Nietzschegan, to perform a piece of John Adams. I've sung a lot of John's work, and it's, you know, really, really incredible. But he wrote a piece called The Wound Dresser, which is lovely, absolutely lovely, and I've sung it before. But in that time, which, you know, 2020, a very complicated year in many, many respects, that text by Walt Whitman is seen to be about, you know, care, people taking care of each other's wounds. But I wanted to say something more explicit. So back to this value of just trying to be honest and saying, you know, I want to say something that I think is necessary. I want to stand in front of people and be honest. So I devised a program, and I, you know, structured it as a concerto because that's another structure that we've upheld for a very long time. It seems, you know, reliable. But an interpretation of it was having 3 movements. So choosing a text, I chose texts of 3 different Black writers, just happenstance. There's nothing called to it. It just, they all happen to be of color. And each text introduces a different movement of music. So the first text introduces a John Adams aria. The second text introduces a short song that actually we're doing a version of in this program that's about hope. And the third section is from Anthony Davis's Malcolm X. And if I could just take a moment just to explain, I really wanted to make a piece that dealt with the question, why do I still feel the need to prove my humanity to you? Which seemed like a very prescient thing to get at, you know, and in terms of racialized police violence, in terms of general inequality, in terms of people being deemed unhuman, or the actions put against people being dehumanizing. So why do people still need to prove humanity? You know, we kind of are that already. So just to share the first text, and in being honest, I walk out on stage and say to the audience a quote from James Baldwin from his book, The Fire Next Time. And the quote is, try to imagine how you would feel if you woke up one morning to the sun shining and all the stars aflame. You'd be frightened because it is out of the order of nature. Any upheaval in the universe is terrifying because it so profoundly attacks one's sense of one's own reality. Well, the Black man has functioned in the white man's world as a fixed star, as an immovable pillar, but as he moves out of his place, heaven and earth are shaken to their foundations. And then I sing John Adams's Shake the Heavens. So that whole thing being me trying to deliver, you know, maybe minority identities are seen to have a certain role. And if we're moving out of that role, the column on the building is moving and things are shaking and thus having to change, maybe through destruction or maybe through transformation. But just trying to use the concerto in its simplest way, meaning it is a personal statement of a soloist, you know, an incredible violinist showing everything that they have and it being the conduit for that sort of expression. I wanted to use the concerto in the same way, but, you know, singers are cursed with words. And so those words had to be about something. And so I just said what I felt like saying. And
it was, as you said, a very particular time, 2020. At the center of the work is a song, a piece called Vigil. which is written in response to the killing of Breonna Taylor in her own home by police, I think in March 2020. I mean, I guess that is unusual in our world of music which is able to respond. I mean, maybe it was a particular function of that time as well, because everything else sort of stopped. But maybe music which is able to respond in the moment to very urgent and terrible events. I think it started as a film. Is that right? That piece?
Well, actually, it started as simply the song, and actually the song was first written here in Amsterdam. Actually, I was here maybe 4 years ago or so. And it came out of an improvisation. There's a wonderful composer named Ige Dieudonné who's French and Dutch and lives in Dieppe. And we met each other through colleagues, and we would have improv sessions where we would set different moods and just improv within them. And so this song came out of a prompt of combining gospel and French Impressionism, which I think have a lot of commonality, actually, in terms of like how certain chords are used. Without going into much in the theory of it, they live in a similar space. So we just had an improvisation, and I just came up with the words as we did it. And the words came out, "Where there is darkness, we'll find light." So the song existed fully formed in the improvisation, which I took as a blessing. It was a very special thing to happen. And so that happened, prior to a year or so prior to 2020. But as I said, institutions trying different things or needing to do different things. I was asked by an opera company to make a video. Lots of people were asked to make videos. And in that time, especially with response to the death of Breonna Taylor, and living in the South with my brother, who works in various aspects of voter access and politics, we were cooped up in the house because of the pandemic, and people couldn't demonstrate or even go to vigils or gather collectively to engage, tragedy. And so I made the piece called Vigil to kind of be a place where people could have that sort of feeling. So it became a film, and it's essentially became a video of me singing the song very close up, and then interspersed with different photos of vigils that were happening around the country. And I thought it was, very affecting, and I shared it with my family, and they did too. They were kind of my test group. And then I shared it with this company who shared it online. And then I had a response from a donor to that company who I had known, who was, an older, very affluent white woman, who made me have the impression that by watching the video, she had done something, about what was going on. And it was kind of horrifying to think that I could make something that made people extricate themselves from the actual tragedy. I mean, this is the sort of person who could very well donate to nonprofits or put some sort of real fiscal effort towards, helping organizations that are trying to counteract tragedy. So I really realized I needed to change, what that video was about. I got rid of all of the imagery of vigils. I didn't want to have people think that they were participating simply by watching. And so I decided to make it about presence and about connecting to one's own experience of the tragedy. So it became kind of a meditative tool. I took a kind of a meditative process that we use, in theater in warming up, which is just about, feeling the weight of your body on the ground or on the chair, noticing the surface your hand is touching, noticing your breath, becoming just present in your body. And I think you do that so that, if you're present in your body, you can be more free and accepting in your mind or in your emotions. So the video, it has me singing, but interspersed are these various questions, feel the surface, feel, and feeling or thinking about, well, how did I sleep last night? And then displaying the sentence, Breonna Taylor was shot dead in the middle of the night while she was sleeping. She was unarmed, she was innocent. So you become present in your body, you think about, your gift of sleeping, however you did, and then you realize that there was another person who had a very violent alternative to what that was. So that, I hope, produces some sort of emotional response, but that's not the end. It's not enough to just cause emotion. Essentially, you might be even inviting people to trauma, but it's about trying to direct that energy in toward a sort of change. So the video ends very decisively, like the music continues to where you have to keep watching. And there's just a very clear set of steps. It's, I think it's notice your emotional response. Think about what the cause of that emotion is, then try to find organizations or ways that you can help change that cause as you're able. Sometimes that means giving money. Sometimes that means giving time. Sometimes that means having an engaged conversation, about that feeling or about that response to just materially, do something within your capacity. Everybody has something they can figure out to do. Honestly, just think a little bit. I promise you'll come up with something, even if it is just talking about it. So that was the attempt to utilize a song to elicit an emotional response that could be folded into actual action.
Yeah, it's a call to action. I can't believe it, but we are running out of time. I wonder, I can't really see very well, but I wonder if anybody has any thoughts or questions for Davone before we finish. Is there nothing? What?
Keep on talking, please.
Yeah,
More
keep
talking.
talking. I guess it's a slightly obvious question, so forgive me to finish, but it appears to me, and you've said it in different ways, very eloquently several times, that the impact you're having as an artist comes through being so clearly yourself in all the aspects of yourself. I wonder how, without having answered the question for you, I wonder how you would advise or counsel young musicians starting out in this conservatoire. What would be your advice to them now? Because although you're still young, you're at a very different stage. What would be your advice to a young music student now?
Two things. First, learn the jobs of everyone around you. Everyone. Your teacher, understand where they came from, what they've done. The stage manager, the person behind the camera, the person who is, turning on the lights, because anything that you do is not divorced of any of that work. We wouldn't be sitting here without a group of people that, are using their expertise in order to make this occur. This did not just occur itself. We're standing in the midst of other people's work. So to continue to try to investigate, what are other people doing? You existing on a stage is not divorced from somebody who, got up early that morning and put that chair there. Very, very important. If you understand those things, you can understand how to use those tools. You can understand how to be an actual collaborator by caring about the people that are doing everything adjacent. That's a continual practice. And then always being curious about how you connect to the music. In terms of how do you interpret a song, or how do you interpret things that don't have words? A bigger challenge in certain ways, but I always say, if you can't tell me explicitly why you're playing that note, don't play it. You have not earned, playing that thing. You have not earned singing that song. And in fact, what you do will be devoid of meaning if you haven't literally connected to what that idea is. And that just fuels so much. It fuels, choices of phrasing, choices of timbre, choices of how you're going to employ your technique. There's a lot of, radiating actions if you think, how am I connected to this thing? And then the last thing, I'm adding a third, is just to have that curiosity radiate through the repertoire generally. There's the general ongoing exploration of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What does all of that mean? I guess to get at that, and I guess to close, just to tell a tiny story. I've done a lot of work with a Baroque orchestra in San Francisco, Philharmonia Baroque, a really lovely organization. And their executive director, I've become good friends with, and we were having lunch, and she was saying, in this time, we're really trying to diversify our board. We want to have more people of color or more people from different backgrounds, on our board, the people that are actually governing and funding the organizations. Like, how do we do that? And I said, well, if those people felt welcome, they would be here, and they're not. So think about why that is true. And further than that, don't invite someone to your house if it's dirty. Don't invite someone over unless you understand what you're inviting them to. And I say that to say, I think a lot of things within classical music and institutions can be left anonymous and left without fully trying to understand its import or what's beautiful about it or problematic even. You have to name those things. And that doesn't mean you have to, yes, you should be inviting a diverse group of people to make things. You should be looking at the broader repertoire and seeing what you can, incorporate. But understand, what are you incorporating it into? It's not enough to say that the piece is great. You have to tell everyone why. Because if you can't tell everyone why, then why convince them that it's great? You have to actually have a reason. If you want to go on about the chord structure or how it changed a certain train of music, or, what its historical implication is, know those things and be able to say them. It's a disservice to core repertoire to not actually understand where it comes from, what its context is. You're not gonna get any young person excited about Mozart unless you can actually say, this is the reason it happened. This is why we think it's genius. And you might find that some of those things, if you dig a little deeper, are not so special, and that's okay. But you will know for a reason, and you will choose things based on the fuller incarnation of how they're used for expression.
Thank you for those three things, and thank you for Davone for the absolutely extraordinary hour, giving us so much to think about. I feel that this will all be available online, and I think it's been a really wonderful start to our series. Thank you so much for doing it. Everybody, if you can get a ticket for tomorrow and you haven't already, be there. And thank you for coming. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.